Hey, welcome back to Studson Studio. This week we're going to build the bathhouse from Studio Ghibli's Spirited Away.
This building's not old, it's fake.
Not only is it fake, but it's cheap. To build it, I'm using some foam core board, corrugated paper, cross-stitched canvas, an empty tissue box, recycled cardboard, some balsa wood, some acrylic, craft paint, and white glue. But to get started, the main tool of choice is knife. No! While I'm building the bathhouse this week, I've decided this actually won't be my only entry into the Ghibli universe. This is episode 1 in a multi-part Ghibli series, which I'll be uploading occasionally alongside other game and movie topic videos, with the final Ghibli episode culminating into something that combines all the Ghibli crafts into one diorama. Okay, let's start crafting. First, grab a tissue and save the box. As a convenient first step, a tissue box makes a good base structure without having to do much planning and measuring beforehand. It's more fun for me to make it up as I go along, plus I get the satisfaction of knowing I started out with literal garbage. The tissue box is going to be the base floor of the bathhouse, but I'm covering up the weak cardboard with dollar store foam board, which will add a little bit of strength but also provide a good base for adding a plaster texture later. I'm intentionally making the walls a bit too big so I have some extra material to work with. To make the 4 walls as seamless as possible, I'm slicing each wall at an angle so that when they're taped together, they come together without any overlap. I have very little patience for glue drying, so I chose a nice slow drying white PVA glue for each edge, then smothered the edges with painter's tape. Think of the tape as a band-aid to prevent your blood from spilling out. Then I realized the glue needs more air to breathe in order to dry, so I went with a minimalist tape approach instead. Not included in this edit are all the times I ripped the tape off early, only to have the glue wound keep splitting. The bathhouse has a small bevel at its midsection, so I'm filleting off just a bit of extra material here. For the front entrance, I'm slicing a few pieces of foam, then joining the edges in the same way as before. For the front window, I'm using this piece of cross-stitch plastic, which you'll see me do an infinite amount of times throughout this video for every single window. This cross-stitch canvas is one of the magic materials of this video. I love it. Actually, it's a tie. Gold medal for magic material also goes to corrugated paper. By the way, the best way to cut this stuff is upside down. That way you don't crush the little tube things between each sheet. The bathhouse has about 1,000 roofs, so it's nice to have a material that looks kind of like roof tiles. To emulate the look of crumbling plaster walls, I'm using Liquitex modeling paste. I'm spreading an extra thick layer on all the foam, especially around any seams that might have gaps. And then don't forget to stipple that goop with a paper towel to get rid of all of your brush strokes. Depending on the scale of lumpy bumpage you're going for, this might be good, but I wanted to sand it down a little bit so it wasn't quite so bumpy. Make sure you wear a mask and do your sanding outside like a smart person. For all the box windows that extend out from the bathhouse, I'm supergluing down a few strips of balsa wood to clippings of old food packaging. Your snack choice may vary. Then using more plastic canvas for instant windows. I must confess that superglue was not a very good candidate for this type of plastic. It took quite a long time to set, but luckily gravity worked pretty well to keep everything in place while I built everything. For extra eye distraction, I'm slicing up a bunch of 1mm balsa wood strips and adding as much as I have patience for. I decided early on that it was more important that I could finish this in a reasonable time frame, even if it meant Miyazaki would be disappointed in my attention to detail. Okay, I'm switching things up and using a large popsicle stick for this next part suddenly. This will become the floor of the balcony on the left side of the building where they fly the bathhouse flag. For these thicker balsa wood beams, I'm whittling away some slivers to add some choice lumpiness. Imperfections like these will add a lot of depth to the final model once it's all painted up. As you can see, I'm not showing any shots of measuring and cutting the materials for each piece, and that's because I hardly did any measuring throughout the whole build. Most everything is eyeballed from a bunch of image references I had pulled up while building. Then I would make a quick cut and shave things down as needed before gluing them together. I went into this with pretty much no plan on paper. Actually, that's not really true. I spent a few seconds drawing this masterpiece before I gave up and decided I'd rather start building. You can screenshot and print that blueprint free of charge. Okay, back to craft. I made a non-functioning sliding door, also known as a door-themed wall, using more popsicle sticks and some toothpicks as beams. Then, using a cap, I traced out a couple supports for the underside. One thing I tried to be cognizant of while building is avoiding the number 4. Since 4 is unlucky and sounds the same as the word death in Japanese, I opted for superior neighboring numbers such as 3 and 5 when it came to numbers of beams or columns in various places around the build. Or for example, the number of rows in the wood slats here. I'm not sure how much of a bad omen this would be for crafting, but I also made sure that my elevator terminal on the inside of the building skips the 4th floor as well. For this roof, I tried overlapping a few layers of corrugated paper to make some faux shingles. And then for the underside, I cut balsa wood against the grain so I could get it nice and flexible to fit the curve. This is looking pretty good, but I think we need some nice gold and sparkly details for the doorway that fits right here. Oh, thank you. There's a lot of choice gold shiny bits in this tangle of old jewelry. Hey, speaking of gold shiny bits, shout out to my first patron, Eric Baroni. If you're interested in becoming a patron as well and helping me make videos like this, head over to patreon.com/StudsonStudio where you can get a shout out, project sneak peeks, and more to come in exchange for a couple gold shiny bits. Thank you.
Take the gold! Take it!
Yes, please, thank you.
This shiny bit used to be a tangled up necklace, but now it's the metal hinge on this door. I secured it with a little bit of super glue and then built the rest of the details using some balsa strips and more of that plastic grating. The doorknob is then a tiny little nail that I clipped to size, and I almost didn't need glue for this perfect fit. And I can't tell you how satisfying it was to finally get to glue down these box windows to this plain cube. Actually, I can tell you, it was alright. Here I'm doing a little wraparound roof around this corner and then covering up that unsightly seam with a beam. Here I'm cutting out some tiny windows on an otherwise plain wall. And lastly, let's cap off the bottom floors here before we're to the deluxe top floors. As you can see, I'm really skimping on the wood supports that should theoretically be going all the way across the entire level. I don't want to waste my precious balsa wood, so I'm only clipping out the exposed beams that stick out around the perimeter. Finding little ways to only use half the material I would normally use feels like I'm doubling my money. It's free balsa wood. By the way, don't throw out your scrap food container cardboard. This garbage makes an excellent crafting material. Then I swiped some coffee stirrers from the kitchen. Actually, I lied, I only planted them in the kitchen for that shot. I actually only use the stirring sticks for crafting, and I drink my coffee black, so stirring sticks have no use around coffee. I'm hot gluing some more of this cross-stitch canvas as walls, and then covering up the nutrition facts for those delicious blueberry treats with more cardboard. By the way, if you have some of these disposable chopsticks lying around, you can do the old roll and snap technique to create instant structure or columns for your crafting projects. For the gold room near the top of the bathhouse, I quickly made this out of foam and cross-stitch plastic, then Mod Podged it to add strength and make it easier to paint later. I'm whittling some more lumpy beams to put around the deck here, and then fighting gravity to keep them upright while the glue mostly dries. While I assemble this roof here, I want to explain those random chunks of foam in the background. Those are just some scraps of foam board I used to help raise the roof up a little bit so I could get the awning at a slightly higher angle. I chopped the top off of these toothpicks for posts and then battled gravity a little more to keep them straight. Alright, and we're on to the final floor. The bathhouse roof distinctly curves up at the corners, which I can't do with this paper, but I can sort of trick the eye with this piece of curved balsa wood. Then I'm using casually measured pieces of coffee stirring sticks to add a railing around the deck. And for the walls, off camera I assembled these using hot glue, balsa wood, and some more plastic canvas. These get hot glued up around the edge, and then more garbage cardboard to cover it up. And the last detail here for the front side is a bunch of toothpick columns before we're throwing it to the back. Next, I'll be making the walls and windows for Yubaba's penthouse. The window holes were cut just barely big enough so I could get them in place with a pressure fit and the tiniest dab of glue. I used coffee stirrers for the trim on the wall, and then if you want to know how I made these short walls, rewind the video about 30 seconds and see how I made the front wall. If you don't want to fight gravity to get toothpicks to stand up, do this big brain move and glue them together in one piece beforehand. To top it all off, let's make the roof. I used a scrap piece of cardboard to measure out the proper size, then glued 2 pieces of corrugated paper back to back so I'd have extra detail on the underside of the roof as well. This part was a bit tricky actually, trying to get the right sizes before gluing everything together. I'd recommend using some scrap cardboard to make a roof template first. I assembled the whole thing upside down and waited for each edge of the hot glue to dry before moving on to the next. Jenga. I added a little wedge of a toilet paper roll for some structure, and then used the scrap sheet of paper to measure out how big the next section of the roof needs to be. All of this corrugated paper is going to end up getting painted anyway, but I switched colors to a different sheet here, just because that's the kind of fun guy I am. We're having some good times now. For these curved beams, I'm using these little bird beads I had. I think technically in the movie these are fish, so you can send me to crafting jail for my inaccuracies. For the spire that sticks out the top, I forgot to film this part, but basically it's just a plastic cap with a piece of cardboard wrapped around it. I lightly scored the cardboard with a craft blade in 6 segments and then folded it around so it would retain its hexagon shape. And then I did the same devilry for the column that sticks out the top of that section. I made a pretty messy roof using various wedges of corrugated paper. I wasn't a fan of how bad it looked, so I covered the whole thing up in some modeling paste, stippled that goop, and it hides all the messy edges. Now it's just messy in a different way. Now let's go back to that tangled jewelry tumbleweed and search for a few free crafting details to add some ornateness to the model. This piece was an old earring, and then I filled it in with a couple of these leaf pendants I had in that sack. I also recently got this gigantic pack of rhinestones meant for nail art. They work as a nice little detail here. As you might recall from the movie, the backside of the bathhouse is a beautiful mess, but I have other plans for it, so I'm just adding a ladder for now. I'm just about ready to paint, but the final step is to add some Mod Podge to all the paper roofs just to add some strength. And then off camera, I whipped up a couple walls to attach to the outside of the garden area. Alright, let's paint. I'm priming the whole thing in the cheapest white primer I could find. This took several passes to fully cover up that neon corrugated paper. Don't forget the underside. Once it was all primed up and looking like one cohesive model, I decided I was going to try doing a little pre-shading on this model. Basically, I'm going to use this black paint to add shading between the crevices and any area where the sun might otherwise have a tougher time reaching. This includes areas near the base of the model, undersides, and any place where the model geometry forms a crease. The idea here is that some of this contrast will still show through once we add our other coats of paint. If you're familiar with 3D modeling, this looks similar to turning up the ambient occlusion on a model. I also tried to use the same technique to add contrast to where there might be shingles, but ultimately I end up covering up the model with too much green paint. Oh well. The base coat I'm using is a rusty red that I mixed up a couple months ago. It's red with a little bit of orange and brown mixed in. I'm spraying just enough paint so I can still retain some of that pre-shading from the previous step. It's kind of hard to be super precise with the airbrush, so I end up getting some overspray, especially when I try to spray the columns. But that's sort of inevitable, and I was planning on doing some hand brushing anyway. Actually, I was going to hand brush the whole thing, but the airbrush was quicker to get a uniform coat across everything. So definitely you don't need an airbrush for this project. I like to keep some various scraps of cardboard lying around so I can use them as a guide to keep my edges looking clean. I definitely missed quite a few spots while painting this whole thing. I tried to keep a bird's eye perspective of how this would look from an outsider's view, but if you were a tiny Stuart Little standing on these decks, you would definitely see all the missing spots without paint on them. This deep green I had was a little bit
too deep, I think,
but we're going to brighten it up with some lighter shades of green in the next steps. I'm using this neutral gray I have for the backside, but you could use any gray that you have. I have no strong feelings one way or the other. I mostly just want to paint the gold sections.
It's gold!
Oof, that's way too much paint. Your paint shouldn't flow after you've spread it on your surface.
I love gold!
For this section, you'll need any off-white or even a
Cream and beige.
This became a fun little game of carefully trying not to hit the red columns with the white brush, or I lose. Oh, I lost. For adding some brighter shades to the roof, I'm mixing together a green using 1 part olive green to 1 part of this lovely holiday green and a touch of off-white. I used a chisel brush to gently detail just the raised edges of the roof so that I could retain the darker green in the recesses. With the leftovers, I carefully brushed Yubaba's windows. For dry brushing all of the wood, I used a light khaki brown. I'll typically use a flat chisel brush for dry brushing, but for small areas like this, I have this poor synthetic brush that I've really abused over the years. Ooh, this next part's pretty fun. To add some age to the red plaster walls, I'm taking some of my rust red from earlier and adding small amounts of pink at a time in multiple passes using a light dabbing motion with this chunk of a sponge. Less is more here, so I tried to get most of the paint off the sponge before dabbing. For areas too small for sausage fingers, I used some tweezers holding a small speck of sponge. The mixed pink was also great for dry brushing all of the red throughout the whole model. And that'll do it for painting. From here, I moved on to adding a little bit of a wood floor on the interior of the entrance using a pre-stained piece of balsa wood. And for the curtain at the entrance, go grab a leftover piece of denim from the last pair of cutoffs you made.
What is this?
Oh, go right to that!
I'm hot gluing a tiny square to a piece of a toothpick that's cut slightly too big so I can wedge it between the entrance. For the bathhouse sign, I slapped a yellow post-it note to a sheet of paper, printed out the characters onto it, then used matte Mod Podge to seal it to a sheet of balsa wood. Chopped out that balsa wood and added some age with a watered down brown acrylic paint. I used a couple stick segments I found outside as logs and then glued it to the front using some white glue. I also found this stick on a previous beach excursion. It had a pretty nice wavy look, which I thought looked like a bonsai tree. I glued some of the smaller segments around the trunk as branches and then brushed the whole thing in a light brown. To complete the branches, I'm gluing on some pieces of Woodland Scenic's clump foliage and then brushing on a watered down PVA glue to add this yellow fine turf as a highlight. Just sprinkling on a bit to the top is enough to add some contrast. Turned out my tree was a little bit too short for my base to clear the height of the fence, so I made a little platform using a couple pieces of foam board, slathered that in some Mod Podge black paint, white glue, and then sprinkled on some green flock for grass. Then I just jabbed it into the foam using some white glue. With all the dirty work over, it's time for a bath. Ah yes, lovely. This is a homemade bath remedy that's about 1 part brown acrylic paint to 30 parts water. I was actually pretty happy with most of the color on the model, so I didn't want to go crazy with the wash, so I ended up only using it on the white areas to drop the brightness a little bit. For the flag, I printed it out and then used Mod Podge and a ping pong ball to try to form the flag into a pleasant little curve that's catching the wind. For the flagpole, I had a couple beam sabers left over from some Gundam model kits, which I spray painted black and then added some black thread and super glue to attach the flag. There's a couple iconic details missing though. I think we need a bridge and no face. Okay, this is going to be a bridge speed build. For the supports, I cut 2 curved sections like this, and then cut a bunch of coffee stirring sticks into 1.5 inch lengths. I attached the 2 end posts first and waited for them to dry just a little bit so the other slats weren't sliding all over the place. And even though I thought my measurements were perfect, I still had to use a pair of scissors to cut off a little bit of the hanging excess. I decided to use hot glue because it would dry fastest, but I made sure just to use a baby's breath of hot glue so I didn't have tons of it squirting out the sides. Actually, I like a little variety, so I ended up switching to white PVA glue and then super glue to keep it fresh and exciting. For the details at the top of the posts, I dug back into my jewelry sack and pulled out these little end caps from the ends of a pair of earrings. And then for the paint job, we're going brown for wood, red for the rails, and then we're using a gunmetal gray for the little earring end caps. I dry brushed the rails in a little bit of pink and then used a black acrylic wash for all the wood slats on the bridge. This is just to add a little bit of an aged look and to add some wear and tear. And for this hungry hippo, I'm using a scrap of an old t-shirt, a clumped up piece of aluminum foil for the body, and some Mod Podge. Wear some gloves if you do this. I made a huge mistake doing this barehanded. After it dried in a way that resembled draped fabric, I painted it black. This body has no face, but it needs a no-face face, so I printed out a no-face face onto a piece of curved plastic, then glued that face onto the body with no face, making it voila, no face. And with that final detail, enjoy the bathhouse beauty shots. Hey, thanks for watching another edition of Studson Studio. If you like this video, I'd really appreciate the usual slew of YouTube interaction. Maybe consider subscribing for more videos, maybe a like and a comment, or share this video with a Studio Ghibli fan in your life. As always, let me know what kind of things you'd like to see crafted in the future. I will perish before I find the time to build every suggestion, but I love reading them nonetheless. In the next video, I may very likely build a Zelda thing, so give me your best guesses as to what Zelda thing I have in mind. Also, special thanks to the support on Patreon. The coins there go directly to helping me make more crafting videos like this one. That'll do it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.